Today I want to talk about 10 mistakes I've made as a game developer. Coming up. Hey guys, it's Travis Vroman here with another daily video. And today I want to talk about 10 of the mistakes that I've made over the course of my game development career. Not only in a professional space, but also in the independent developer space. These are things that I've learned over time that were mistakes, and hopefully just by me listing off some of these things, maybe you guys can be aware of some of these things and not make the same mistakes as I did. So, the first one on the list is biting off more than I can chew. This is probably one of the most common ones that newer developers experience, but even sometimes experienced developers make this mistake quite often. You think that whatever it is that you've set out to do is going to be simple and straightforward, and maybe it is, but you don't ever account for the unforeseen. And by doing that, you set yourself up sort of for failure. So typically what happens is you've got this sort of curve that happens where you've got skills that goes this way and confidence that goes this way, right? So as you're progressing along your game development experience, or as you're progressing along your game development career, what's going to happen is as you learn things and as you get more comfortable with things, you're going to have this sharp increase in confidence as you learn things. And at some point, you're going to be way up here, although your skill is still way back here. And you're going to think that you know a lot more than you do. And I know that a lot of developers won't say that this has ever happened to them, but I'll be truthful. It happened to me. It's happened to all developers. I don't care who you are. At some point, you're going to overestimate your skills. And what's going to happen is you're going to get smacked with reality, and reality is going to go, no, you actually don't know that much, and you're going to have to go through a grind to get something done, and you might not even be able to finish it on your own without a lot of help from other people. And that's okay. That's a sort of a learning experience, but, understand that biting off more that you can chew is typically a mistake made by developers that don't have a lot of experience in quantifying how much work needs to be done in the project they're about to set off doing. So always be on the lookout for that. When you're planning a project, if you don't understand what you're trying to do, make sure that you upskill in those areas first before sort of starting on the project and saying, yeah, I can do this, I got this. Which sort of segues into my second point, which is not constantly upskilling. So upskilling is something that, as a professional, you should be doing all the time. You always want to be learning. You always want to be improving your skills. Anytime that you get complacent with your skills, you're sort of plateauing. If you're comfortable with where you're at, you're not improving, even though you might be going to work every day and doing your job and maybe you're good at it. If you ever get to a point where you're comfortable, you're not expanding. You're not learning anything. You're not improving yourself in your overall career. So constantly upskilling is something that you absolutely have to make sure that you do. I know for myself, I had probably about a 2 or 3 year period where I didn't do this at my previous job, and I got very complacent with that, and as a result, I'm not as good now as I possibly could have been. So not constantly upskilling is the second point. The third point is selling myself short, rather. So a lot of times throughout my career, I've sort of understated what I'm capable of. And this is sort of the opposite of what happens in the first point, where you bite off more than you could chew. So to reference back to that graph where you've got skills that goes this way and confidence that goes this way, when you get up to about this point and then you've got something that hits you in the face and you're like, oh, you can't do this, your confidence just drops way below, like down here somewhere, off the screen even. And it's at that point that you start selling yourself short. You don't take into account everything that you've learned already. And it's sort of easy to lose perspective of how far you've come up to this point. And so a lot of developers that have only been doing it for a couple of years at some point will wind up selling themselves short. They're like, well, I'm not really good at this or that, or I'm not really a good developer. I'm just okay at what I do, or I suppose I might be able to. No, you can't do that. You've got to identify what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and try to build upon your weaknesses, to make them into strengths. So selling yourself short is a huge mistake. It might cause you to miss out on some opportunities that you otherwise might have gotten if you were a little bit more confident. So don't ever sell yourself short, but on the same token, don't oversell yourself either. Be honest about where you're at. Number 4, ignoring marketing on my games. And this is something that I've always sort of done since I started developing software years ago, professionally about 10 years ago or so, maybe a little bit longer than that, is I've never paid attention to marketing on any of the products. And this sort of applies to everything that I've done, even outside game development. There's been lots of products that I've developed over the years that could have been a lot more successful had I not sort of ignored the whole marketing half. If you're looking to make money in this industry, marketing is an absolute must, and you have to get good at it. And it's definitely one of the areas where I'm still upskilling and learning how to do it. And it's really just a bunch of experimentation, but completely ignoring marketing and saying, I'm just going to put my game out there into the store and it's going to sell you 1 million copies. No, it's not. No game that's on the store, on the Google Play Store or the Apple Store, no game or app of any kind sells millions of copies without lots and lots and lots of marketing. And it's just something that you can't afford to ignore if you're trying to make money. If you're doing this as a hobby or sort of as a moonlighting type thing, where you're not really concerned with about how much money you pull out of it, then that's fine. That's actually my case. I'm not trying to make a living solely off of the projects I work on at home, so I haven't paid as much attention to it. However, the products that I have released and the products that I've sold would have been a lot more successful had I paid attention to marketing. So point number 5 is being a perfectionist. This is another thing that I see a lot of game developers do, is they try to tweak everything to death. And it quite literally tweaks it to death because the product never winds up seeing the light of day, because the developer working on it keeps saying, oh, it's not perfect, I need to revamp this, I need to revisit this, I need to redo it, and they keep getting stuck in this iterative polish pattern. And to an extent, that could be good to make sure that your product is polished, but perfectionism, it's not really possible, especially with games. Games are really complex pieces of software, and there's a lot of design and a lot of programming that goes into it, and if you're playing an online game, then there's even more of all those things, as well as networking to be considered with. And if you spend time trying to perfect your product is never going to leave the door. There comes a point where there's diminishing returns on that, on trying to tweak and be a perfectionist, where you just have to say, you know what, this is as good as I can get it. Let's release it. It doesn't have any outstanding critical bugs. There's no crashes. The game is intuitive to play. The graphics are high quality, or the sound is high quality. It's smooth. It's fun to play. Just release it. There comes a point where you have to just sort of draw the line and release the game. All right, so point number 6, making my own game engines. I've mentioned this a couple of times on the channel already, but I'm going to mention again because it's still something that I'm even to this day tempted to do, and that is to make my own engine, or to make my own game engines when I'm trying to release a game. I will stress that making a game engine is something that every game developer should do as an exercise to understand all the underlying technology. But doing that first or early in your game development career is definitely not the way to go. There's a lot that goes into game engines. It is tens of thousands of man hours to actually make an engine like Unreal. And that's not even making the game, that's just making an engine and the tools that surround it. And I've made a couple of other videos talking about making game engines, so I don't really want to go any further into that here. I'll post some links to that in the description below. But making your own game engine is another mistake that I've seen a lot of new developers make, and even experienced developers. And like I said, I've made that mistake too. So if you're thinking about making your own game engine, maybe try making your game with an existing engine first, just to get some more products out the door, get some more experience, and later on try making a game engine. But I'm just going to leave that point there because, like I said, I've made a couple of other videos about that. So, number 7, not setting goals or deadlines. This is another big one. It took me about 6 or 7 years before I released my first game on my own, and that's simply because, well, it's for a bunch of reasons, to be honest. Making my own game engines and whatnot, but also it had a lot to do with the fact that I never had any goals set up and I never had any deadlines set up for myself. And when you're working by yourself, it's very easy to say, well, I don't have any deadlines because, I don't work for anybody except myself, so I could just release this game when it's ready. When it's ready, never happens. It's never going to be ready. So people, for the most part, work best when there's a deadline. Otherwise, you've just got infinite time and you won't prioritize things, or you won't try to expedite things to get the product done. And if you're working under a deadline, it's a lot easier to focus, I find, at least. As opposed to, well, maybe I'll just watch YouTube for a little bit, or maybe I'll just browse Facebook or whatever, do a whole bunch of stupid stuff. If you've got a deadline, even if that's one you've set yourself, it reprograms your brain to say, I need to focus here and get this done. I need to buckle down and get these things done so I can ship this game on time. And doing so publicly makes you accountable. So deadlines, goals, accountability, those are all kind of under the same point. Set them from the very beginning of the project. Say, I'm only allowing myself 3 months to develop this game, or I'm only allowing myself 6 months to develop this game. This game will go out on XX date. Okay, so point number 8. Not finishing games or projects. This is another one that I have suffered from in the past, and on occasion still suffer from, and I see a lot of developers suffer from this. And it's not just game developers, it's developers of any kind, but there are so many projects out there that are just beautifully written. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears have been poured into the project, and the project maybe gets 50, 60% of the way done, and the developer just abandons it and moves on to something else that they want to work on because they get sort of bored with the process. And then that project never sees the light of day. And it's a shame. And it's something that really is terrible, because if more independent developers finish the project that they're working on, there'd be more products out there for the consumers to choose from. There'd be a lot more awesome games out there on the market. There'd be a lot more maybe open source software, or a lot more software packages to choose from for photo editing or something like that. Whatever it is. Moving on to point number 9. Not showing others my games or the projects that I was working on was another huge mistake that I personally have made. And I also see a lot of other people make this mistake. And the problem with that is you don't know if your target market is actually going to like what you've developed, or if your target market is actually the correct target market. You don't know if people use your product the correct way, or if they're using it in a way that maybe you didn't intend, and maybe it's causing them problems, and then maybe they give you low ratings because there's problems because they weren't using it the way that you intended, because you didn't ultimately either lay it out in an intuitive way or describe somewhere how it should be used. This external output is invaluable when you are trying to understand your target audience, and it's also valuable for people that you may think are outside your target audience, because sometimes people that you think are outside of that audience might actually be in that audience and you don't even realize it. So showing your games or projects or whatever it is that you're working on to others as you go is super, super important, because you need that feedback early on before you get totally ingrained in a way of doing things and your project isn't flexible anymore to be changed without a whole bunch of work. So definitely show your project to others. The more public it is, the better. Point number 10. This is probably the biggest point in the entire list. And this is something that I myself have experienced, and something that almost every developer that I've ever come across has experienced. And it's something that you should definitely be aware of if you're new to development of any kind. And that is the biggest mistake I've made, point blank, was not starting soon enough. Not starting on learning game development soon enough. Because I didn't think that I could do it, and I thought it was hard, and I just sort of did a lot of reading on how to do it, and a lot of watching YouTube videos on how to do it, and a lot of learning but not learning, if that makes sense. There comes a point where you just have to jump in and get started and do it. You can only watch so many YouTube videos, you can only read so many articles, you can only post on so many forums about different ideas you had, or where should I start at XYZ, before you have to just buckle down, make a decision, and go a direction. And get started. If you don't get started, you're not going to be anywhere. Point blank, you have to start to get somewhere. And I know that this sounds like a super basic thing, and it is a super basic thing, but it's probably the biggest barrier to entry into development of any kind that I've ever seen. And it's also probably the most common one, because so many developers out there just don't get started because oh, well, it's not convenient, or oh, I don't have enough time, or oh, I don't have the skill set to get started yet. And it's just, the point is you just have to get started. The longer you wait to get started, the longer it's going to be before you get good at what you want to do. And I'm going to make a couple more videos about when are you ready and things like this, but don't put off starting development, because that's the single biggest mistake I've made. And I would hope that somebody else, even one person watching this, would take that advice and get started on something right now. Just to recap, number 1 was biting off more than I could chew. Number 2 was not consistently upskilling. Number 3, selling myself short. Number 4, ignoring marketing on my games, completely ignoring marketing on my games. Number 5, being a perfectionist. Number 6, making my own game engines. Number 7, not setting goals and deadlines, which means that I also didn't have any sort of accountability of any kind. Number 8, not finishing projects or games. Starting them but not finishing them before I move on to something else. Number 9, not showing others my games or projects. And number 10, not starting soon enough. So thank you guys so much for watching. If this video helped you, please leave me some feedback below. Leave me some comments. Hit the like button. Please subscribe. And like I said, I'm going to be posting these videos daily. So till next time, see you guys tomorrow.